here. Recording is in progress now. So I guess before I start the videos, are there any questions? Thoughts, hopes, fears, desires, anything like that? Did I show you my assistant's new suit?
It's incredible.
Yes. And
but you don't show the blouse so much in Instagram.
So
and
that's
the chain is so delicate.
There's the chain. And so yeah, the little blouse, because she is a little bit modest, it's just a little, kind of gathered.
Nice.
And lining because I can. So yes, and she had her hair colored because she felt the bright blonde was a little bit too much for the suit. I know. It's my students were kind of fascinated by this today. I was showing some photos and they were like, you made. Yes, I make things. This is what I do for a living. This is what I do. So, I make things for amusement as well as profit. So what's not to like?
If you're not happy doing it, what's the point?
Well, honestly, I remember my dad used to say, you choose well because you're going to be doing this for a good long time. And my mother, of course, was like, stop with that, be a pharmacist. But if I hit pharmacist,
I wish you would put little tiny videos of cutting and making. It's exquisite to see, but the process, you take a Chanel jacket and you drop it down into miniature. I think it's 1 million times more difficult.
Well, it's the order of construction is different than human sized clothes. And that's a whole other thing. And see, this is one of those, give me time, I'll do it. Because videos, hey,
you do it, I'll watch it.
Okay, great.
There's an entire YouTube genre to Barbie, especially around Barbie, but other dolls as well. Making clothes, making stuff that the corporations didn't come up with, or if they did, do it better.
Yeah.
And Barbie in particular, a little bit with right now with smart dolls, which are basically 1/3 scale dolls, and Barbie's like a modified 1/6.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's an audience. If people will watch my Froggy stuff make hair scrunchies into a knit dress, they will watch you make a Chanel jacket.
Okay.
You have an audience. They're there.
Okay. So back to making jackets. We're going to be making the lace jacket tonight. So let's see. Let me share the screen. Assembling the lace. And so as usual, if there's any, if you have any questions, please don't be shy, because that is what this is all about. So let us.
Still fitting mine. I went over your fit videos and some stuff from Linda, and that helped, and I worked on that all day today. So
good. Well, Linda Maynard, I cannot sing her praises enough. I think she's, you see, because people ask me here, let me just kind of turn this back on for a moment. People ask me, who do you talk to? Because there's so much information out there. Some of it is reliable, some of it is not. And so I just, I have a very short list. If I want to know the absolute 100% couture way of doing something, Susan Calgi. By far, she trained in a couture house. She has, she's the Bible for me. For fitting, Linda Maynard. Linda Maynard, she has a really good hand with the slippery fabrics like the charmeuses and the chiffons and that sort of thing. She has some really good techniques. She's just all around smart. Judy Newcomb at Threads, Sandra Betsina for inspiration. It's a very short list, so. So you'll love Linda Maynard. If you haven't taken a class, I highly recommend it. So that said, let us go. Assembling the seams on lace is somewhat like a puzzle. What you're seeing here is one of the sleeves. You can see that I have marked out front facing direction. And you can see the red thread that I used to mark the stitching lines. Now, what we're doing here is we want to decide how to overlap these seams. And that's what we're going to be covering next. I'm deciding to start at the cuff and match my way upwards from there. So looking at the pattern, this I've decided I want to overlap this way. And going up, it looks like one side will lap over the other, but that doesn't always follow. The object here is we want the two stitching lines to be one on top of the other, but how to get there is somewhat arbitrary. The thing to know is that there's no right or wrong to this. As long as the seam looks like it was woven together in the final product, it's all good. So what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be cutting just to the stitching line. You don't want to take it any further than that. And so this piece here, going to match, there we are, there, that intersection here. The seam lines match there. And so what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be looking at this leaf here. So that is what I'm going to overlap. So I will use this motif here down to here on one side. Now let's look at what's happening over here. So this is where we cut to. So now what I'm going to do, okay, this is where we cut to. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this over. What that will look like, I'm going to take this back and see there is this motif here. So I'm going to cut backwards a little bit. And at this point, you can cut across the motif that you're not going to be using. So I'm going to cut this to here. Let's see. I think I'll have to cut through this motif a little bit. We want to cut that to the stitching line. Now, put this back and see where we're at. So now, what we're looking at, we overlap this to here, and this is looking like it's going to be in the way. So what I will do is come back here. Cut back to there. And put this underneath. See if this wants to go on top. It's still fighting me a little bit here. So, and like I said, there's no right or wrong on this. So, I think what we're going to do is take this little motif out. Now what I'm doing while I'm working on this is I'm cutting through the netting as well. Sorry about that. So we'll slip that underneath and put this on top. And I think we have a winner here. Okay, so looking at here, the stitching lines here, sorry, match. So we're coming to here, and I'm going to match the stitching lines and pin those, and pin this motif here. And now let's go back and have a look here. Yeah, I think we're good. So looking at this, I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you can see what I've done. What I'm looking at is starting here. There we are, okay. This is our stitching line, the two stitching lines at the cuff. So I'm going to use this motif in here, and I'll probably stitch around to here, and then it's working our way up. This I'll stitch around here. To about there. So what I will do is I will go off camera and thread baste this, because thread basting is quite a good idea. And I will bring it back so you can get a better sense of where this is going. Okay. Now, I'm going to zoom in, and so you can see where I started here, and you can see that I came up here and around this particular motif, and then up and over to here, and then started a new thread and sewed this motif around to there.
Are you thread basting as you figure out where they're overlapping, or are you waiting until the end and thread basting the whole seam?
I like to thread base as I'm going.
That's what I thought.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's just, it's easier to take it kind of in little bites.
Okay.
So yeah. Okay. So Marguerite, you had your hand up?
Yes. Do you trim away whatever is underneath?
Not yet. Because
Okay.
what kind of where we're going with this, we want to get all of this basted, get everything basted and ready. And then when we put it under the machine, it's going to be a free motion. You could either sew it by hand, or you could use free motion stitching on the machine to sew everything. And then finally, when everything is sewn, then you can go back and trim the excess off on the top and on the underlayer.
Okay. And then do you try to be, I don't know how to say it, purposeful with the pattern so that it looks deliberate and not what just fits? Do you know what I'm saying?
Actually, I try to make it fit. Because see, if you remember, we cut it out, we had kind of the repeats running kind of consistently across the garment.
Uh-huh.
So in this situation, I go more for do the different motifs kind of interlock rather than trying to go with any kind of consistency.
Okay.
And see, one of the beauties of a lace like this is it's quite busy. So you don't have to be quite so concerned about that. If you're working on something that's somewhat of a stripe, you have to be a little more careful. Okay.
Do you start with one side on the top and then change to the other side on the top? Or if it would work out, would you do all one side on the top?
If it looks good, I would take one side, because it is far easier. to just have one side lapping over the other. But what I like about kind of alternate, the join isn't so obvious.
Mm.
You know, because it kind of breaks up the pattern. But again, you know, that's one of those things that as you're working with it, you can see, and this is one of the advantages of basting as you go, you can see if it's, you know, if it's looking a little too repetitive, or if the join is actually sort of disappearing because you've lapped one on top of the other. Because the object here really is you don't want the joins to call attention to themselves. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Thank
Okay,
you.
so other questions before we continue? Okay, so let us continue. Brought that up to there. So that serpentine path where the thread basting is traveling, that is going to be the actual seam. Here is the actual stitching line, but what we're really doing is transferring the straight line to curved lines so that this is going to read like it was woven to shape. Now, looking ahead, I decided to stop here because the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come back in here and I'll make a cut here and a cut back in here and have this overlap. And I think I will probably work up to this section here. So let us begin. So coming in here, you can cut through that because you don't really need it. And so then I'm going to cut through, and it's okay if you cut through this basting, no harm. See, that's going to bring that over this way. And then if I work it right, I'm going to cut the netting to about here. See if I can make this all overlap, and I think it's going to work. Yes. Okay, there we are. So there. So you can see, brought this over to here. So now this motif here and the leaf above so what I'm planning on doing here is coming up in here and sewing around to here and up around to here to there. That's going to be the next line of basting. Now you can work this in segments like I'm doing here. You don't have to do it all in one go. You just work it as best you can and see where things want to overlap. And as you can see, I overlapped this way. Now we're overlapping this way. So again, I will go off camera and baste this and bring it back and show you the results. So I'm back and I have sewn this around and we're up around this leaf here. And I've gone across and I've sewn here. Now, how I decided why to stop there was because looking ahead, I saw that we have this motif here. So what I'm planning on doing is cutting up into here so the flower overlaps. So what that will look like is I'll come in here and cut right to there. I'll show you how that looks. Because you can see here, if you're not using the motifs, you can cut through them. And so, and again, you also want to make sure you cut through the netting as well. So I'm going to cut through just to the stitching line here. So you can see I've cut just to the stitching line. And then I'll bring this back. So I know that this has to hit right about there. So if I cut, I'm going to save the flower, but not the little stem below it. So I can cut through that. Again, through both layers of the tool, or all layers of the tool. So I'm going to cut right to the stitching line. So overlap, opposite. So now you can see, oh, there we are, sorry. So yes, you can see here, that is where we made the cut. And so then what I'll do is continue on and see, probably use this motif here, or see what I can do on the other side. But like I said, this is a puzzle, and you can overlap one way, you can overlap the other way. The object being that it looks like it was woven to shape when you're done. So I will go off camera and finish this seam and bring back the results. Okay.
I have another question.
Yes.
So this is the top of the sleeve, right? Where you basically got a dart in there. Are you laying it over a hem or anything like that to join the seams, or just doing it flat, or?
Well, I'm doing it flat, but you know, if you have a sleeve board or a ham, that certainly doesn't hurt to have.
Okay.
And but you know, one way or the other, if you line up the stitching lines, the red thread here, it's automatically going to take a shape. But yes, if you have a ham, it doesn't hurt.
Okay, just wondering. Thanks.
Okay, so other questions? Okay, so let us finish this up. This seam sewn. I'll show you, give you a little bit of a close up here. You can see there. And it sort of meanders all the way down. I'll give you a pan shot in a moment. But I first want to show you what the back looks like. I think that's going to be very instructive. Look at the back. Let's do a little close up here. You can see how the seam really meanders. It doesn't run in a straight line. See, there is the actual stitching line. But you can see the orange stitching is very much different. It will fit exactly the same. You're just pivoting the seams from a straight seam into this meandering seam. So this is basic setup. Now, something also to know, and I will just do this off camera, you want all of this excess here held flat when you put it under the machine. So what I will do before I take it to the machine, which is going to be a little while later, is to baste all of that down so I don't catch it in the machine stitching. If you catch some in the machine stitching, that's not going to be catastrophic, but it's better if you didn't. So now let me turn this over and I'll show you the seam. So starting at the cuff, you can see it comes from here to here, and then over to here, to there. Let me just zoom in a little bit so you can see it a little better. So here, so really, this is the stitching line. This is going to be an overlap seam, which you'll see later, but the setup is what's so painstaking. The stitching is not as grueling, but this is one of those times, don't think you can just pin this and get away with it. Just don't. You want to baste everything, because then you don't have to worry. You can also, if you need to, test fit it before you sew, so you can make any adjustments. But yeah, you can see this. So the lace overlaps first to one side, then the other. So now, just to have a look again. So I'm not going to make you watch me baste every one of these pieces. I will go off camera. It will take me a while. So I will baste all of the different seams together. And I'll bring you back a pile of work that you can see the results on. Here we have the bodice all basted. So in your order of construction, as you can see, to the right is one of the fronts, in the middle is the back, and to the left is the other front. So what you'll do is to pin and baste together the princess lines on the bodice. I'm just going to zoom in here. So you can see we have everything basted. And this is the first pass. Next, I will show you the two sleeves. And here are the two sleeves. Now you can see here, you can see the directional arrow. That means the sleeve faces the front. And you can see the center seam of the sleeve is basted. Now these are ready for stitching. Okay, so oh, one moment. Questions so far? Are your brains full?
Getting there.
Well,
So far, so good.
So,
I
so,
think
so
it's one of those things that you have to do. It's one thing listening to it, and it's another thing actually being in there and doing it to
Yeah.
get the feel of it.
Yeah.
One question, and maybe I'm jumping ahead. If I would decide to hand stitch it, do you just use a back stitch? What stitch do you
you
use?
could use a back stitch, or you could use a whip stitch.
Oh, a whip stitch. Okay.
Now I've
Okay.
seen, and this is really appliquing lace to a ground fabric. I've also seen a buttonhole stitch, but
Mm.
no buttonhole stitch on this. It will take you forever. So, you know, if you're hand sewing, because some people like that, and you know, it is one of the ways that they do it. It's just a very tiny, tight whip stitch. So that will hold it securely as well. Okay.
Do you use, for that, would you use double thread or single thread?
See, I would use a double thread because I think it's more secure. Other people use single thread. So that I think would be a personal choice. But I tend to sew with a double thread if for no other reason. I hate when the needle comes unthreaded.
Oh.
And yeah, see, also in tailoring, because I do a lot of tailoring, I don't want to lose a needle inside a garment. And so one kind of way of making that not happen is by sewing with the double thread. Because if you're sewing with the single thread, there is a chance that you could come up leaving a needle in the garment and you won't find it, but your client will. And then they'll be upset. So double thread. And it's, you know, that people ask, okay, what kind of thread do you use? I just use a regular polyester, a really good polyester thread. That works just quite well for me. Other people might have a different idea on that. The other thing, I like to iron my thread before I use it. And I know that sounds a little persnickety, but one of a tool that I learned recently about, see, I don't have a lot of hair, so I don't need a flat iron to make my hair straight. But a guy I know has a flat iron to use to iron his thread, which I thought was pretty brilliant. So I of course bought one, and the guy was a friend of mine and I were at this store, and he was looking at me like, why are you buying this? It's like, it's not for my hair, it's for my sewing.
I have a question, and you may get to it. Are there any tips if we are doing the machine free motion, for especially
Yes.
for those of us who've never done free motion before?
Yes. Okay, what I would say is, first off, have the machine. See, I tend to have my machine a little higher than other people. I think it's better on the back.
Mhm.
And whenever possible, what I like to do is rest the heel of my palms on the machine and use the fingers more often than trying to
To
like,
do this.
yeah, I mean,
Okay.
there are times I have to, but it really, you know, really tenses everything up. But whenever possible, if you can rest these on the bed of the machine, it makes your life easier.
Okay.
And if you have the sticky gardening gloves with the sticky on the bottom, it helps control the fabric a lot.
Oh, well, that's good to know. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so Chris, you have a question.
Yeah, I have a question, and I know it makes sense to me, but not quite. It's when you marked each sleeve with the front is facing. So
Yeah.
it's facing towards the center of the bodice. Is that what that arrow means?
Yeah, yeah, because see, these two arrows, when you put the sleeve on the body, they're going to face the bodice front.
Got it.
And that
Gotcha.
because, you know, especially when you have it all kind of like this, it's really hard to tell which is the left
is
sleeve.
what?
Right. And so I like to mark it like I'm going to be stricken with amnesia at any moment, because
Okay,
and so that's why I do that.
that's good. Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
So other questions? Okay, so now we get to sew this together. So let us continue. And we're off. Now, one last bit of setup before we actually start sewing. You can see here, I have a needle threaded up with the green basting thread, and I've begun. What we want to do is all of these extra pieces that we did when we appliqued everything back and forth, what we want to do is to baste everything out of the way, because when you're sewing, especially if you're working on the machine, you don't want to catch something in your seam that shouldn't be there. So what this does, and I like to use a different color basting thread just to so I can see what I've done. What this does is it holds everything that you don't want to catch in the seam out of the way. And I have worked ahead, and so all of this is the only one I have left. The other pieces on the table are have already been basted. So I will continue on, and I will bring the camera in to show you a close-up. Okay, so here we have, let me zoom this in, you can see there is stitching, and there is the green stitching. So really, anywhere that you don't want to get caught is going to be basted. And so once we get everything basted in place, we will then go to sew this together. Before we start sewing, let's look at what we're going to be needing as far as thread, needles, and foot. This is the Gutermann monofilament. It's nylon, transparent. You can get it. This is the clear. There's one called Smoke, which works better on darker fabrics. Then there is just your standard polyester or cotton wrapped polyester thread. Now, you have two choices here. You can use either the monofilament or this in the needle, but you're going to be using this thread in the bobbin. You don't want monofilament in the bobbin. It will make your garment itch. From there, needles. This is a Schmetz Universal 65-9. You could go a little narrower, you could go a little larger, but you want a fine needle because you're working with fine thread. And finally, the darning foot. See, I have the machine threaded up. You can see that the monofilament is in the needle, the polyester thread is in the bobbin, and we're going to be dropping the feed dogs. This is all free motion. So this is our setup. We have the foot, we have the threads, we have the needles. Now, let's look at machine settings. You want to loosen your thread tension about between 2 and 3. Loosening your thread tension and sewing with a slow speed, which I'll talk more about in a moment, are going to make it so that the nylon thread will remain intact. One other setting I prefer on the machine is to turn on the needle stop down. Also, you'll drop the feed dogs for this operation. Now that we have prepared the fabric, everything is basted. See here. Grab hold of these 2 thread ends because you're going to need that. You can see here, the orange is where we basted the 2 together, and that is where we're going to stitch. I have dropped the feed dogs, and this is free motion. Zoom in a little bit here so you can get a better sense of what I'm doing. There, okay. So now really, it's a matter of the basting with a straight stitch. And you can see that the needle stop down is going to be very helpful here. And you want to move it slowly. You also want to sew slowly, because the thing about any kind of thread like this nylon is that you don't want it to heat up as you're sewing. If it heats up, it becomes brittle and it's more likely to break. So slow as you go. And really, that's what this is all about. There's no mystery to it. You just follow. And the beauty is that this thread just disappears. Let me just turn this around this way, and let me zoom in so you can see. So you can see right there. See, we've stitched here and up and around. So you can see that that stitch just disappears with the transparent thread. Just turn around. I'm not going to make you watch me sew this whole thing, but let me sew just a little further. And if you catch a few stitches in this, no harm, no foul. Try not to stitch over the basting if you can avoid it, but if you can't avoid it, so really, there's no mystery to this. I've seen people sew these with the hand whip stitch. I've also seen them use the zigzag stitch. Both are correct. This one as well. Slow as you go. You don't have to, this is not a race. So what I'm going to do is I am going to back off a little bit so you get a little bird's eye view of this. And really, that's it. That's the stitch. So once I get everything sewn, following the orange basting thread, I will take you back over to the work table. So I'll get busy and sew these seams. Now, a little something to know here. I'm almost done with this particular seam. You see that straight pin. What that leads back to is, here we are. See here, there's the straight pin, there's the thread end. Now, the reason I have a thread end here is because I have broken a needle. When you're working with these needles, it's a fairly fine needle, and so you run the risk of breaking a needle every now and then. And so you want to start the thread over, but it's good to know exactly where to start, because actually, let me put the needle in and then I'm going to turn the fabric over so you can see what it looks like from the other side, because if we're sewing with matching thread, you don't really see much. So just turn this way. And so there. So you can see there is, you can kind of see the stitch. That's kind of in that area there. So it's really hard to see. If you break your thread, you need to know where to pick it up. So that's why I want to show you this little technique. And again, also understand you're going to break some needles. It is just part of the territory with this. Depending on how many thicknesses land one on top of the other, it's something to accept. So what you do is you put in the new needle, you rethread, and you continue. So I will continue and finish. Now that I have all of the stitching sewn, the next step is going to be removing basting and trimming. So if you remember, we basted all of these extra pieces down in the back. So we will remove the green basting first before we start trimming. So at one end, I want to come in here and take out the green basting. There's one here. Fairly straightforward. So this is done. And our next step is going to be trimming. Before we trim, I'm going to talk a moment about good scissors. This is the Gingher Tailor Point scissor. Now, you can see here, one blade is a knife edge because it has a wider distance between the edge and here. The other blade is a bevel edge. Now, as a rule, if you're using these to, say, open a well pocket, you put the knife edge point through, that gets through the fabric, and then you turn the scissor so that the bevel edge is down. The bevel edge then is less likely to catch on the layers below it. So when we're trimming, we use the bevel edge down. So just here. So now I like to find something. Here we are. I like to come in having the raw edges facing my palm and then come in below. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to start kind of in the middle here, but you could start at one end. And so the object here is to trim away as close to the stitching as you can. Now you sort of have to use the Braille method with this. You have to feel. Notice I have my finger underneath, and then I come along and trim. And there's no race here. You don't necessarily have to run a race and win something. You want to make sure that this is trimmed accurately. And you want it trimmed as close to the stitching as you can get. Now you don't necessarily see the stitching that much. So that's why I say have your finger underneath so that you can also gauge where that stitching ends. I'm not going to make you watch me trim the entire piece here. I just want to give you a sense of how this works. So the first pass, we trim the underside. We trim all of the excess close to the stitching. And I will go off camera and trim that and bring you back the results. Okay. So I have the underlayer trimmed. And you can see when I hold it up, you can see the shadows of the cut edges. Now you notice I haven't taken out the basting that holds the two layers together, the orange. That is so that you can kind of steer, because sometimes you can't really see the stitches. So you can see here. So we've trimmed everything as close as we could get on the underside. And the next step really is to flip this over and do the exact same thing on the front side. Again, you have bevel edge of the scissor down, and I like to have the seam allowances facing my palm. And so I will trim everything on the top, and again, bring you back the results. So I'm coming upon the end here. So this is ticklish business, like I said. This is not a race. Better to be accurate than to cut through something you don't want to cut through. Now, when you're trimming the net, you want to make sure you cut both layers at the same time. Just makes everything a little easier. You can also, if you can, put it under a little bit of tension as you're cutting, because giving a little bit of tension is going to make it cut a little more readily. Also, it's going to help you get your scissors underneath everything. Okay, there we are. So as you can see, still the orange basting is where the stitching is. Now, one thing I like to do as I'm looking over things is to see if there's any double layers of netting. And this is where working on a colored surface is going to help you see things, but I don't really see any. So here we are. Both sides are trimmed. My next step will be to remove all of this basting, the red and the orange, but I won't make you watch me do that. I will remove that off camera and bring you back the results. Almost to the end here. So now this is where we're at on the sleeve. This is the sleeve cap. So what I have done here is I have left the thread basting intact where it matches the shoulder. This is the shoulder seam of the sleeve, so that when I attach this to the bodice, I can use that as my matching notch. So let me pull out and show you the results. So here is the entire sleeve sewn. Now let me zoom in a little bit. And notice you don't really see the seam. That is the object of this particular applique seam. Now you can see here, this little rise, that is the shaping at the bicep on the sleeve. So as you can see, we have created shaping with an apparently seamless technique. So now, if you notice over here and over here, I have worked ahead and sewn the first pass of seams for the construction. So I will lay everything out flat on the table to show you what I've done and set us up for the next pass of construction. This is what I call a cheat. See, notice here, I have a little tiny hole. And some people would think that's a catastrophe, but it isn't. So this little sidebar is going to show you how to fix that and make it look intentional. This is where I'm going to take this little motif here and install it in here. So the easiest way, there we are, is to make a tiny little slash there. And just remove some of that so I don't have to wrestle with the whole thing. So then I will slip this in there. So that's slipped in there. So what I will do here is first pin it. You could base it if you wish, but pinning is just fine. So then from here, I'm just going to go over to the machine with the free motion stitch and stitch across and all around, and then trim off the excess and bring you back the result. And here we are. That's the little patch. It's all sewn in. The hole is gone. Now, some people would say this is cheating. It isn't really. So here are the sleeves. So we've sewn the out seam on both of the sleeves. And you can see here, this is where you're going to be very, very glad you actually marked direction, because that points to the front. Those point to the front. Otherwise, you couldn't tell front from back on these sleeves, and you could get them in upside down, or backwards, actually. So we have the sleeves. Next, I will show you the bodice front. Here are the jacket fronts. And again, aren't you glad you marked so you know which way faces the center front? So this will sew to the jacket back, which you'll get to see next. And here is the jacket back. Now you can see these ripples on the sides are where the princess seams, which you can't see because of the applique seam, create the shaping at the waist. Now the next step, which I will do off camera because you follow the same steps, I will sew the side seams back to front and the shoulder seams back to front. And once I've finished that, I will bring the entire assembly back and show you the results. And here we have the two sleeves. And as you can see, we have the body of the jacket. Everything is sewn together, ready for the next step. The next step is going to be preparing the cuffs on the sleeves for the binding. And then we will make the bias binding for the jacket and the sleeves. Just revel for a moment with this jacket. And really, it's hard to find the seams on the inside, even though I know where they are. So there we have it. The next step will be the bias bindings. Ta-da! Thoughts, comments?
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
You mentioned at one point that you were looking over it to see if there were any doubled layers of tulle. If you see those, do you take out the back one?
I would take out
couple
the
layers?
back. Yeah. Mhm.
Back? Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So other questions?
How many times you made this jacket?
This particular one, this is the first time for this one, but I think I showed you the pink lace one that I did for my land. And I don't know if I showed you this one. I may or may not have. This one, I made for myself.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, pretty cool. The first time I actually did this particular kind of construction, this was years and years ago. I had a private student. She was getting married and she wanted to make her wedding outfit. And so she bought some very expensive guipure I'm sorry. She bought some very expensive.
much better.
I'm practicing. I really am. I'm really
You
trying.
are, it shows.
So anyway, she bought some at Britex. It was it was at the time, I remember it was $95, which was some years ago. And she just got it in her head that we were just going to cut and sew the seams and all. And I'm like, no. So I took it away from her and I made it for her because I just couldn't watch her do it the wrong way.
Brutalize the fabric.
And so, I did the applique seams and I did the bias spine. It was pretty. It was a really pretty outfit when she was done. So yeah, I've done several of these. It's just, the idea of kind of how you piece it together so that you just completely diffuse the seam is always fascinating to me.
I have one more question, but it's about the scissors.
Okay,
Is
go ahead.
Tailor point scissors the same thing as knife edge sewing scissors?
Well, the knife edge for Gingers are all knife edge. Let's see, here, let me get there are different ones. This is the 5.5 inch Ginger craft. I think they call it the Craft 5C. And what I like also about them is that it has a very thick spine on the blades, so that and that's the reason they call them tailor points, so that with the thick spine on the blades, you can cut right up to the point and the points will not bow out or separate this way.
I think it must be the same one. I need to buy that. And on Amazon, it says knife edge sewing scissors, Fiskars Ginger 5 inch.
Ginger. Get the
Ginger.
Ginger. Don't get the Fiskars.
It's the same. It says Fiskars Ginger.
Fiskars, I think, bought Ginger, which is like, but if it
But
looks
they look like that.
then I would go with it. Yeah.
Perfect. There's my cart. Thank you.
And see, honestly, this is something, and my students look at me funny when I say this, but I have several sets of everything.
Mm.
I think I have 5. I think I have 5 of these, 5 of the shears, 5, because it's better to send them to Ginger to have them sharpened. And so, no, really seriously, I have lost a number of pairs of, especially the tailor points. What if you go to the other places, they'll cut and then they'll stop cutting about a millimeter from the points, which is useless. You have to have, you want them to cut right up to the point. That is, there are certain things. And so, it may be a little bit of a hassle to send, it's a little hassle to send them to Ginger, but honestly, what I do is I have a box of the sharp scissors and I have a box for the not so sharp scissors. And if I get one little skip into the box with the not so sharp scissors, it goes. And when I have like 5 or 6 or 7 different, pairs, then I'll send them all at once to Ginger. But I have in reserve the other sharp scissors. So I'm never without good sharp cutting tools. That's one of those things that I just, pressing tools, cutting tools, marking tools. You can make do with a decent enough sewing machine, but and I tell my students this because they have limited resources. I'm like, you know what? Because I have one young man, he's like, he doesn't have a sewing machine at home. Just go to the Goodwill and get a straight stitch old Singer. That's all you need for what you're doing. You just want really good cutting tools and pressing tools and marking tools.
Yeah, that's one size of scissor I don't have. A beautiful 11-inch big shears.
Oh, I have.
Old.
Have I shown you all my big tailor? Oh,
Mm.
I've got to say, these are really cool. Yes, I am a tool geek. Yes, I am.
You're among friends.
I was in Baltimore with Susan and they were having a little flea market and
Wow.
Wow,
with,
those look like something you'd see in the leather shop.
yeah, you know,
Oh.
you could be, they weigh probably, they feel like 3 or 4 pounds. You could bean someone with them. And, you know, these are the old school,
Mm.
you know, and they have the little foot. So, you know, you slide them along the table. And I saw them and I said to the guy, how much? And he said, $20. And I said, will you take 15? He said, you know, they're worth 20. I was like, so then I took them to Westfall, which is the place I take my non-Ginger scissors here in New York. And she was like, wow, these are great. And I said, so can you sharpen them? And she said, oh, we can work with these. So, and you know, if you want to cut something out in a hurry, this is your tool. You know, like 5 strokes and you've cut out a skirt. It's just, you know, and yeah, and they're comfortable for, you know, they're definitely ergonomic. They have the, you know, the thumb rest and all that. So it's just, yeah, different. I have different scissors for different things. And the other thing is rotary cutters, because I tell my students, don't use just one or the other. Distribute your cutting over rotary cutters and scissors because you don't want repetitive stress injuries. You know, I say, you know, you think, you know, you're always going to be 20, but then when you're my age and, you know, you have, you know, I happily have avoided that so far, knock wood, because I really try to balance it between the two. And so with the cutting tools, I buy my rotary cutter blades by the 100 pack.
Huh.
So if I get even a little bit of a skip, out it goes. I've known people who I guess there is a device that can sharpen rotary cutter blades. And someone
Yeah.
asked me about that. I said, okay, that falls in the category of rinsing out your Kleenex and reusing. There are certain things, you know, you know, we all have to kind of like watch our pennies on occasion, but there are certain things I just, no. Sharpening your rotary cutter blades for me is like rinsing out your Kleenex. So I just don't do that.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I have a question.
yes, Christine.
Yeah. So Kenneth, in a video, just maybe 1 or 2 back, you went
Okay.
through the order of assembly on matching the laces and basting it together and then stitching it and then trimming away. So
Okay.
could you just highlight that again? Tell me what those were. They were numbered across the screen, but I was
Okay.
making notes and I didn't see it fast enough.
Oh gosh. So this was last week or?
No,
was-
right now, just,
Okay. So when you're assembling for the first pass,
Yeah.
assembling the garment,
yes.
on the sleeves, I sew the top seam on the sleeves. And then on the bodice fronts, I sew the princess seams on the bodice fronts. And on the bodice back, I sew the princess seams.
Okay.
And so then, you know, once you have all of those sewn and trimmed and done all of the, you know, the nosebleed that you've done to get that together, then what I like to do is I sew the fronts to the backs at the shoulders and at the side seams.
And right now the sleeves are still flat.
That's correct, yes. Because because our next thing is going to be putting on the binding. It's much easier to start the binding with sleeves flat. So Christy, you had another question?
Yeah. So shoulders front to back, the neck out is the
Doesn't matter.
stitching or
Doesn't-
sleeve, it doesn't matter. Okay.
Because that whole directional stitching thing, I understand why people do it. I really don't pay attention to it because what I tend to do is either pin based or here you're basting the whole thing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's not really a woven, so that's not really an issue. But in just general sewing, I pin base as opposed to pinning perpendicular because debates rage over this. Some people just, I mean, people, it's almost like religion and politics. They're like the people who pin base pin perpendicular, and those who I just gotta go, okay, you know, there are times I do both, but as a rule, see, I tend to have a stitching line marked on my garments.
Uh-huh.
So I pin base, you know, I pin right on the stitching line because I want to like turn it over and make sure that both stitching lines are exactly on top of each other. And so when you're pin basting, and I use the long pins for that, it sort of is a stand-in for basting, which is kind of a stand-in for sewing. So the directional thing is not something I really pay much attention to.
I had it. I just saw too much obsession with on a skirt to start at the bottom and go up because the pieces end up biased as you get towards the bottom of the skirt.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
You know, and so you have more stability if you stitch them together. I know it's probably just an obsessive thing that doesn't really matter.
You know, and I'm sure
I
people
hand based everything in place at first anyway.
then see, then you've solved that problem because
Okay.
this old tailor said years ago, basting is half sewn. So if
Yeah.
you've hand basted it, you have fixed the problem. So you can
Okay.
go to bottom to top. You have already halfway sewn it together. So
Okay.
sweat that. See, there are a lot of things I don't sweat, and other people kind of look at me like I'm some sort of Philistine. And like, okay, I'm a Philistine. I will own it. And see, this is where, you know, there was this old man at FIT, Professor Rizzo, who hated me with the heat of 1,000 suns. And he really did. And he used to tell people that I was just a damn home sewer and my work was crap.
Oh,
We do.
And I had someone tell me, she said, well, this is what he's saying about you. And I said, I think that's just so cute. Said, what? I said, you know, when you were in grade school and that boy pulled your pigtails because he really
Yeah.
liked you.
They really liked you.
And she said, yeah. I said, he's seen me in a tight black t-shirt and he can't get it out of his head. I will hit below the belt if I have to. And
all's fair in love and war.
no, this is a guy who dissed me, and he basically caused me some trouble that he didn't have to early on. And so I just figured, you know what? I remember, I have a long memory. If you've done me a good turn, I remember it forever. But if you do, you know, if you do something like this, I remember it forever. And the last conversation we had, he started this rant about, you know, you're just a goddamn, you know, home sewer and your work is crap. And I said, do you have work in the permanent collection of the Victoria and Albert Museum? He said, well, I don't care about that. I said, oh, well, that would be because you don't. And so,
I have another question.
you know, so anyway, yeah. Okay. So Christy, yeah,
I
question.
had another question, Karen. So on looking at the new Chanel jacket and the outfit for your assistant, I noticed the scale of that fabric is almost appropriate to her body size. So when shopping scale on a human garment for myself, how do I make that? I mean, those things are so important. How do I make that?
Okay, you're breaking up, so I can't really. We've lost you. So I guess I'll try to answer it because you know we're recording this so she can hear it later. I guess you know the thing is, how do you gauge scale on your own body? And really, a lot of that, see, it's a little bit challenging if you're buying fabric on, say, like a website. Now, there are websites like Mendel Goldberg. You probably all are familiar with her. She shows things on a dress form. Gorgeous Fabric shows things on a dress form. So you get kind of a sense of how. Do we have you back, Christy?
Yep, I just had to switch my internet there for a minute.
Okay, so I was answering the question, but I'll kind of backtrack a little bit. So I get, my understanding is your question was like, okay, how do you gauge scale of a pattern on the human form on your body?
Uh-huh.
That is, you know, because they're like Mendel Goldberg does this, Gorgeous Fabrics does it. It's, you know, you want to see the fabric draped on you.
Okay. Okay.
And so, there are times you have to kind of buy things blind. I try not to buy things blind unless it's something I know, like denim. But if it's a pattern, the gold standard really is, you just want to, hold it up to you and see if it matches. Because, there are some people who are really, really tall who can really handle a large pattern. And if you're petite, it doesn't read quite so well. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
That answers it.
but yeah, it is a challenge finding, fabrics that are patterned to her. But so, and when I do a sit and sew with Susan, I'm always like, can I have that scrap when you're done? 'Cause, look at me, I feel like I'm such a kind of a, mooch, but okay. Yes, Michelle, question.
I have a question. I'm thinking ahead to the second jacket. The first one,
Okay.
I've got the tool. I'm using the tool.
Okay.
The second one is white, and I don't want it to read visually as bridal.
Yeah.
So I know the background fabric for both the skirt and the jacket need to pop a little more to make up for that.
Mhm.
What are some other really sheer tool-like fabrics, or like if you were picking something else and you wanted something that had more color and you knew you couldn't get it in the tool, what else would you go, look at this at Mood, or look at this on so-and-so site for something that's that sheer?
You could it's a little bit, you run the risk of, because it's a woven, you run the risk of fraying, but fray check is our friend sometimes. But go with like an organza.
Okay.
And that this would work the same with the organza. You would, it couldn't hurt to have two layers, because you have to kind of catch everything down.
I would do
But-
it exactly the same way, I think.
Mhm.
Okay.
But that would give you a little more color behind.
That's what I'm wanting. That's all I'm wanting is like, if I could get the tool in, like say a brighter pink, not bubblegum pink, and that's the other thing. When you do find it, there's like, here's 3 colors. That's all you got. And you're like, oh, come on. I
Yeah.
need color.
Well, but something like a bubblegum pink, if you open it out as tulle, it's not going to read quite as vile as if it's all folded together. So that's something also to think about. You can go with a stronger color, because once you have all that air going through it, it sort of diffuses it a lot.
Okay. And then the white's gonna also diffuse it also. So,
Yeah.
okay, thank you. Because I was like, what do I do with the second one? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So
Thanks.
other questions, don't be shy. So is our work done here for today? I think it is.
Got it.
Okay. So I will turn the recording off. I'm going to hang around for a few more